welcome everyone. It's good to be one of the first 11 a.m. slots kicking off the Open Source in Finance Forum. I'm James McLeod, and I lead open source at NatWest. But I'm also part of the FINOS governing board. So I was voted in as FINOS Gold representative at the beginning of this year. And I'm also one of the founder organisers of London JS, which is probably my entry point into open source all the way, back in around 2014, 2015. It could have been a little bit earlier than that. And I'm actually hoping that a number of the London JS community actually join us in the room. But today I'm here to talk about, hi, welcome, come on in. It's good to see you. Open source in finance and maintaining the new strategic stack. So I've been part of the FINOS community for a while now. I'm not going to say that I'm one of the original people, because FINOS has been around for a number of years, even before it was actually called FINOS. But across the time that I have been part of it, we've seen a number of projects join FINOS being contributed from across the financial services industry, some from big financial services players like banks, both within retail and capital markets, and those that have been contributed by fintechs as well. Now, when FINOS was first started, there were lots of different contributions that made a lot of sense around what they were trying to do individually. So within this snapshot of all of the contribution timeline, you'll notice that we have contributions like Perspective, which actually happens in 2017. So in a couple of years, that will be the 10-year anniversary of Perspective being contributed into FINOS, which I will say is probably one of the most starred projects within FINOS right now, that brings a lot of unification of how graphs and charts are actually rendered within JavaScript, using various different technologies on the back end around time series. Individually, that actually creates a lot of benefits for anybody who's trying to render data to a customer or to an audience that plays in that space. But then if you kind of fast forward across that timeline, you also have very strategic projects like FDC3, which is an interoperability project for the financial services desktop. But then we also have financial services modeling around Legend and also the common domain model, which you may have heard being mentioned this morning, all the way through. So bring it up to the here and now through Git Proxy being contributed by City, who we have here, and common cloud controls, all the way through to the AI governance framework and AI Readiness SIG. A lot of the way that FINOS and open source in finance is starting to come together is allowing all of these projects to form into an ecosystem. Whether that's intentional or whether it's unintentional, this is actually happening now. And because of this, this meeting or this talk is to really demonstrate how open source in finance is starting to become a lot more strategic in the way that all of these pieces kind of come together to form a bigger part of the overall jigsaw. And the reason why it's important for all of us, whether you are a bank or whether you are a fintech or a consultancy or a tech player, to come together to contribute into these projects, as you would have heard in the keynotes this morning, but to also lead on the projects as well. Because as these projects become more strategic, it becomes more important that we come together as a community to maintain and lead and make sure that they're sustainable, as Madeleine was saying today in the keynote. So within the FINOS landscape, you will notice that there are a lot of different projects, that come together to form those composable pieces. I've mentioned a few just a minute ago, but actually there are a lot in there that not only provide, individual benefits to that framework of open source in finance, but they also join them together as well. And so one of the main areas that I'll be touching upon today is Calm. It's not the sole kind of, purpose of this talk, but Calm is actually starting to become a bit of a glue around the way that we describe architecture within finance, and the way that you can bring architecture into being more machine readable rather than descriptive in Confluence or descriptive in Visio or through other forms of flow diagrams. The Morgan Stanley team are actually pushing really hard on Calm at the moment because it is a technology project within FINOS. But there are a number of us who believe that it could also become a standards project as well, in the way that it does unify and bring together not only the way that technology projects are described in terms of architecture, but also the way the use cases and also regulation is described to go alongside that project as well. But without focusing on Calm too much, because as I said before, this is about open source being strategic, I'm also going to touch upon Git Proxy, which is kind of like our entry point that we're demonstrating in NatWest, having Git Proxy in production now and having it as the main exit and entry point for open source code contributions, and how all of these various different projects, such as the Common Domain Model and FDC3, are able to be contributed into through Git Proxy by engineers on the inside of a financial services institution. And so without that connecting glue from the inside of a bank to the outside, innovation in open source is actually either impossible or very difficult to achieve. And so up until this point, a lot of contributions from banks have happened, by maybe people who haven't gone through a Git Proxy instance to get to that point, or they've been contributing in some other way. Open source in financial services is actually starting to work together now. And I'm pretty sure if you are part of the FINOS governing board, you will see this happening. We get like a really good inside view of how all of these various different projects are actually starting to unify. Now, I don't know if I'm kind of, one of the only people who are seeing this, but I don't think that I am. I think, within the community of contributors, and people who are maintaining, who have been contributing and maintaining FINOS projects for a while, you will see that unification of all of these projects. And especially now AI is kind of coming onto the landscape as well, you'll notice that there are various different modeling platforms, such as Legend, that's creating financial services, financial objects, and also the CDM that can be applied within, the AI space as well when it actually comes to machine learning. And so it's really important that the people who can see the way things are joining together kind of come out into the open to talks like this to actually demonstrate and, enlighten people that this is actually happening, because it's very easy to come to a conference and see individual talks about individual projects and not necessarily see how they align to one another. So I'd like to start the journey with Git Proxy, because for us this is the main entry point into getting code from the inside of NatWest or the inside of a bank into an upstream open source project. Git Proxy for us, and also Git Proxy for us delivers upon what technology leaders need from open source contributors, and that is code in repositories. It's perfectly valid and absolutely reasonable for people to come into special interests groups and to be thought leaders and help steer how things happen and help shape the direction of technology. But without code in repositories, it's very difficult to deliver upon, the total ambition of what it is that we're trying to get to within the open source ecosystem. So Git Proxy is an absolute enabler for engineers in banks to start contributing into repos. And the smallest unit of contribution that you can make is a code commit. Now, when you start layering up all of these smaller units into bigger pieces, that's where innovation actually starts. And that's where code commits coming out of any institution, any bank through Git Proxy can actually layer up into some pretty big strategic and also innovative solutions. And so this is why I'm making the connection between Git Proxy enabling secure contribution, so you get a level of oversight through being able to review a push out of the bank or the institution that's taken advantage of this. Plus also you can plug in some automated modules that enable you to do automated scanning as well. But being able to do that from an engineer into the outside environment allows you to layer those contributions up into pretty innovative solutions across the banking industry. This morning, the AI governance framework was announced. Version 1 was recently released. I believe the announcement was this week. And without Git Proxy, it'll be very difficult, for banks to actually contribute anything other than thought leadership into something like that. Getting a code commit out of a bank into an upstream repo will be impossible. And at NatWest, we're actually contributing back to Git Proxy using Git Proxy. We're also contributing into FDC3 using Git Proxy. And as you go around the conference center today, you may stumble upon a project called FlowWave, which is a new strategic project that's coming into the foundation, where our contributions into that project are coming through Git Proxy. And so without this, it's very difficult for our engineers to be able to make those initial and ongoing contributions out of the bank into somewhere else. Now, the other advantages that having banks as part of this strategic ecosystem, one of the advantages, and actually it's a really strong advantage, is bringing use cases into open source project. So open source is for everyone. You will find the projects are, contributed under MIT, Creative Commons, Apache 2, and so they are there to be leveraged by everyone. But within the financial services industry, it's really important, that we're able to hone, what it is that we're actually contributing to. So there is a steer and direction into that. Banks bring use cases to foundations and open source projects. And they also bring code commits as well, through Git Proxy and, other mechanisms. But it's really important that, the leadership that banks bring into projects also bring how those contributions are layered up and the direction in which, that project should actually be taken. So it's absolutely amazing that technology companies, are involved in open sourcing finance projects, but it's really important that, the project teams who are contributing get close up with all of the financial services players who are going to start using those projects as well. Not only do we actually find out what the banks need in order to make their projects successful, but the banks also bring a level of experience and understanding about what is needed in order to be able to leverage that project on the inside of a bank. It takes a lot of effort in order to go through the various different internal groups in order to get permission to be able to productionize an open source project, whether it's strategic or maybe even if it's, a tactical library. And so by having banks around the table, by having a foundation that's dedicated to financial services, we're able to bring to the center what it is that's needed in order for any project to be accepted by a financial services player. And so not only are banks contributing code into the center of a project now, but they also contribute, the reason why that project should exist, the direction that that project should be taken in, plus also any insight that's needed in order for that project to be accepted on the inside of the bank. And so that actually makes adoption, slightly easier because we get that insight, but, it's nice for any contributing, player in a project to know that that project is actually being used and not just living dormant, or maybe even being contributed into a repository without it being used. So having banks part of projects, if you're part of a bank that's not in a project right now, I very much recommend that you start getting involved in it, because it actually does give a lot of meaning to the reason why that project, exists. So contributions contributions from bank is actually strategic engineering leadership as well. So you can think about contributions as being, a co-contribution from this side, of your contribution lifecycle to an upstream repository. But actually, each of those co-commits that you're making tells a little bit of a history. That commit will be recorded, in the commit history of whatever upstream repository you're contributing to. But the other side of that is that if it's coming from a bank, and if you're demonstrating that that bank is actually, contributing into that repository, you're also demonstrating a level of leadership that is needed in order for that project to be successful. So for a project within the financial services industry that's led by finance to be truly successful, having banks contributing into that repository, even if the engineer doesn't realize this, is actually showing a level of strategic leadership to the rest of the open source industry, that there is actually true value in this project, and it's been recognized by the banking industry. And so every single person who is involved in making that code commit possible, whether it's an engineer at the beginning of the code commit, when you sign it, when you sign your CCLA, and actually make that contribution through Git Proxy, whether they know it or not, they're making a very big signal to the industry that they are leading, they are contributing into this project. And they are, defining where the direction of engineering should actually be going when it comes to open source in finance. And so banks being involved, even if you're not a member of the board, if you are a contributor into a project, you are showing a level of strategic leadership that is recognized through code commits, and also, recognized through getting up at a podium and, making yourself known. So, the other area that's important to touch upon is about how architecture and engineering, is getting a lot closer together now. People are looking to shave off cycle times when it comes to getting code shipped. Now, traditionally, I remember when architecture and engineering used to sit, on different sides of the room for each other. It would almost be like a waterfall process of describing what needs to be done and all of the rules that, that work should actually adhere to, or maybe the different types of, sign-off or different types of checks and balances that a project needs to go through in order for it to even enter development. Well, now, architecture and engineering is a strategic alliance where architecture as code is being recognized as a way to shift even more to the left. So rather than describing projects in terms of architectural diagrams and going through huge cycle times of architectural committee meetings, we're now bringing together architects and engineers into the same repository. Now, this can be done through various different ways, but one of the overarching strategic ways the FINOS is bringing that together is through Calm, which is being led by Morgan Stanley and recognized, even more broadly across the FINOS community now. Just yesterday, a number of us who are members of the AI Strategic Initiative came together at Red Hat to discuss, how AI governance can be described and how it can be accelerated in a way that what you describe absolutely represents what is being done. And I would say that Calm demonstrates kind of like the real value of describing architecture as code, all the way from how a regulation is represented, in a repository, even use cases, and then the architecture of, the system that's being designed and ultimately will appear in a CSP or wherever it may be. All of this description can actually now be represented in a JSON format using a JSON schema through Calm. And there are various different tools that are being created that allow that representation to be represented visually. So architects who are working in that space, in much the same way as Legend provides input for business analysts, can actually look at the way that the schema of that architecture is being described pretty much on screen, right? So the bringing together of architectural groups and also engineering groups through architecture as code is allowing the use cases of AI to actually be sped up and developed in pretty much near real time, because that's how the industry is going. It's really shaving down the amount of time that is needed in order to come up with an idea and get it down and through and into production. So I would like to really, call out Calm as something that people should take a look at in this room. There are various different, demos and also talks around Calm in the conference later today. But it's not just about Calm, it's also about the various different standards that are being created that are also represented as code rather than represented as PDFs. The AI governance framework is a collaboration of many different banks, including NatWest, to say what is needed in order to get AI up and running within a financial services setting. All of these things come together in order to get adoption of technology into banks as fast as possible, so we're not reproducing all of this work bank on bank or financial services institution against financial services institution. Now, the thing that makes this successful is that all of these various different initiatives are actually being led by the banks, right? So they're being led by the people who understand the problem that is trying to be solved. So rather than going out to a third party and adopting some software that takes us the majority of the way for a license cost, all of these various different projects from AI governance framework through Legend, Calm, CDM and others are being produced by banks because they understand the problem and they also understand that they are the best people or the best, open source contributors to solve the problem. So by having all of these initiatives, all of the standards, all of the projects that, apply the standards, such as FDC3, there's, the standard around FDC3, but there's also implementation models and, reference points. These are being produced, by the financial services industry because it's recognized that by bringing all of these players together in order to be able to deliver, you're actually solving the problem, and it's also going to be a lot more robust, and it's going to be a lot more long-lasting because there would be no need to be involved if these initiatives weren't solving the problem in the long term. So it's really important that all of you come together in order to be able to contribute into these projects. So I've talked about the technology reasons and also the strategic reasons why players from across the financial services landscape should be part of FINOS and also part of open source. But it won't actually happen unless we come together as a community in order to make it happen. collaboration happens across the horizontal of the industry, and it's important that we come into places, like FINOS and also conferences like this, where we're able to contribute with a common understanding and also a common sense of trust in the centre. So I would recommend that if you are a bank who isn't contributing into open source right now, maybe look for open source readiness within FINOS, which is a really good first place of contact for any financial services player who wants to learn what it means to be a financial services contributor and all of the various different regulations and constraints that surround the industry. Open source readiness has had contributions into it from lots of different banks. So the answers to many common problems around, how do we actually make co-commits out of a regulated, industry into an open source project, all of the various different regulations around security and resilience, they're all answered in there under a body of knowledge that anybody from this room and anybody from within industry can refer to in order to help accelerate, their adoption of open source. Now, another and probably most important part of this is that now the open source in finance is becoming more strategic and there's a lot more leverage of it within the industry. We need to understand that. And we also need to understand the security measures that need to be brought into play in order to keep those projects safe. Because security resilience within open source, starts at the center. It starts within the repository where all of these contributions are being made into. Open source is a fun and exciting and a great place to network, but it does come with responsibilities. And, the key responsibility is that we keep both ourselves as financial services institutions safe and also the consumers of our projects safe as well. And that is open source supply chain security. So within the industry, there's been there are a lot of regulations and there are a lot of standards that have been contributed into it by various different open source groups, such as the Open Source Security Foundation, which was referred to today. It's a place where you can refer to, many different open source controls that should be adhered to when it comes to keeping your project safe. And it's also run by the Linux Foundation as well, if I didn't say that. But moving outside of that, there's also NIST, FSISAC, and OpenChain that provide lots of different standards for what security in open source means and how we can actually contribute into them and make sure that we're running safe projects. Open source supply chain security and making sure that our projects are secure from the center not only make sure that that project in its current state in a repository is safe and all of our engineers are aware of their maintainer and contributor roles within the security of our projects. But as you start distributing those projects and as they start entering the ecosystems and also, the internal registries where a lot of these upstream projects start residing, you also get a cascading effect, making sure that, the industry is also being kept safe as well. So understanding the use of software bill of materials, making sure that your repository has automated scanning, whether that is new agentic AI, which is appearing both in GitLab and also GitHub. All of these various different tools can help provide us a level of security upon pull request or however your code is being merged into a repository that can keep us all safe. So the Linux Foundation actually supplies a lot of training, and a lot of it is actually for free within Linux Foundation training around open source supply chain security and OWASP and many other different ways in order to make sure that, resilience and security is baked into our projects. For me, strategically, having security at the center of what we do is, extremely important, both within banks and also outside. And then my final slide, knowing that we started a couple of minutes late, is get the training into your teams. We've got an open source contribution policy within NatWest that states that any contributor into an upstream open source repository needs to have the open source in finance developer training that the Linux Foundation provides. And if you are a maintainer, you need to layer on top of that with the certification that you can also take by the LF as well. But not only that, there's lots of different standards of, open source, contribution, and lots of different trainings that are being provided by organizations and companies outside of the Linux Foundation as well. And so GitHub also provide a lot of training about, what contribution in finance actually means and how engineers should be able to do that. I would actually say that open source training and open source security fundamentals aren't something that are an opt-in. I think that they're a must-have. I think that they're also a must-have for anybody who's consuming as well, whether you know that open source is coming into your project or not. So in order to conclude, I would like to say that, open source in finance is strategic. It's becoming a lot more strategic now. We need contributions and maintainers from banks and the industry to get involved in that. We need to keep our projects safe by having a level of training that allows everybody who's contributing to understand what their place is and what security means for them. And we should also roll out, or at least point our engineers to fundamentals of training in order for engineers on the ground, and maybe even the stakeholders around them, to understand what open source is and how they can contribute through other strategic projects like Git Proxy. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for being at the first talk, 11 a.m., kicking it off. I certainly hope that the next speaker who's in has this, hopefully more energy than me, but hopefully I've set the bar high. Pretty much the same. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.